So I've been getting the question why the U.S. is not a signatory of the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court. There's 123 countries out there. Why is the U.S. not one of them? And I'm going to talk about it a bit here. So the International Criminal Court was established in 2002, and it is the next iteration of what started as the Nuremberg trials, and it's to prosecute individuals who commit the most heinous international crimes, such as genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, etc. The U.S. remains one of the few nations that have not ratified the Rome Statute, which is the treaty that created the International Criminal Court. Russia is another one, China, India. There's a handful of countries that have not. Now, the decision to not ratify this has been a pretty big point of contention across the international community because the U.S. is seen as a global leader in economics, military, as well as human rights. So why exactly has the U.S. not ratified this? Well, before I get into the why, I have to give you a quick background on how treaties work in the United States. When a treaty is ratified in the United States, it is considered part of the supreme law of the land. This is according to Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. It's known as the Treaty Clause, and it grants the president the power to make treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate, provided that 2/3 of the senators that are present concur with the treaty. Once a treaty is ratified, it becomes part of the body of U.S. federal law. So every treaty that we sign and ratify is now law in the U.S. It is the supreme law of the land, and this is called the Supremacy Clause, which is a part of Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. And any law that falls under this Supremacy Clause is subject to the supreme law of the land, meaning that judges in states are bound by them regardless of what a state law says or the U.S. or the state constitution says. So this becomes absolutely the body of the absolutely federal law in the U.S. It's essential to understand, though, that not everything is a treaty. We say treaties pretty broadly, but there are many agreements across the spectrum of international relations in the U.S., and there are many agreements that the U.S. makes that are not treaties, and we're allowed to do this through presidential delegation to a staff to make agreements across borders for business and other reasons, and the president himself can do this. So it's not that every agreement we have is immediately a treaty. It's just that treaties are treated with a very special consideration in the Congress and within the presidency. And that's a lot of the reason why the Rome Statute, which would be a treaty, has not been ratified. It's also worth noting that the U.S. participates and assists and actually helps fund portions of the International Criminal Court when it comes to tracking down people like Muammar Gaddafi or even Vladimir Putin. So it's not that the U.S. rejects it outright. It's just that there's some things that run counter to the U.S. as to why we have not ratified it. And here are four, maybe five of the reasons. So the first reason is U.S. sovereignty. And that's probably the biggest concern that a lot of people have, because the U.S. has sovereignty over its people. And there's a potential for infringement upon that national sovereignty. By signing the Rome Statute, the U.S. would be allowing an international body to exercise jurisdiction over U.S. citizens, including military and government personnel, for alleged crimes committed anywhere in the world. And this could potentially undermine the authority of the U.S. justice system and the U.S. Supreme Court and its ability to handle such cases independently in the U.S. Additionally, the incompatibility with the U.S. Constitution is a big concern as well. The Rome Statute contains certain provisions that are considered to run counter to what we as Americans receive as rights. For example, the ICC allows for trials in absentia, meaning that they can conduct a trial without the offender present, whereas the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right for an offender to be present at one's trial and face their accuser. Additionally, the Rome Statute does not provide for a jury trial, which is an absolute right within the United States. You have the right to a jury of your peers, which is protected under the U.S. Constitution. These discrepancies can raise a bunch of concerns about the protections that U.S. citizens have in the International Criminal Court versus what they have in the U.S. Court system, which is seen as a more, within the U.S. purview, the U.S. court is seen as a more fair and balanced system than the criminal court, because the accused stand before a government panel or tribunals or whatever the court decides. But in the United States, you're judged by a jury of your peers. So that's a problem in how these trials are prosecuted. Additionally, there's a legacy law that has been around for 20 years now called the American Service Member Protection Act, and it was passed in 2002. And this is aimed to protect U.S. military personnel from ICC prosecutions because the U.S. has jurisdiction over its soldiers when it comes to warfare crimes. When it comes to U.S. or soldiers committing crimes, it is the U.S. justice system and the Uniform Code of Military Justice that takes over and handles the prosecution. And frankly, it is quite a robust system. Because of this, the American Service Member Protection Act prohibits cooperation with the ICC and allows the president to actually use military force to free citizens detained by the court, because the U.S. absolutely believes that it has sovereign rights to protect its citizens across the globe, period. And we've executed those rights before. If you kidnap American citizens, it doesn't matter what country you're in. If you're not helping us, we will go get them by force. And we've done that many times. So this legislation complicates the relationship of the U.S. with the International Criminal Court. Those two things don't. We would have to repeal this law before we could consider ratification of the International Criminal Court, because under federal law, if we ratified that treaty, those laws would contradict each other, basically. And then because of that, there's really a lot of, I guess, a lack of congressional support. The U.S. political climate has played a significant role in the reluctance to join the International Criminal Court. And it doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. There just has not been bipartisan support for ratifying the Rome Statute, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican in the presidency or controlling Congress. None have had any wish to ratify the Rome Statute. And many politicians actually voiced concerns about what I've just talked about. Most of the limited attempts to garner support were met by huge amounts of resistance from both sides, which has made it basically impossible for the U.S. to move forward with ratification. And a lot of the reason is like the UN and WHO, there's this idea that the court has been politicized. We see this in the UN Security Council, where countries like Russia and China have veto power. We don't want the International Criminal Court to become politicized and target American nationals as a means of retaliation or exerting pressure. This is despite safeguards that have been put in place to prevent such abuses, but there remains a concern that countries with a lot of money or a lot of influence could manipulate the International Criminal Court to come forward with biased or unfounded prosecutions of Americans. This is a similar situation that like I said, the UN faces, where a lot of countries get upset that they think the UN is subservient to the United States. However, I counter with, they're not very subservient when countries like Russia and China can veto the wishes of the U.S. and the collective West. So those are just some of the reasons why the U.S. is not a signatory of the International Criminal Court, and I personally agree with that. I believe the U.S. justice system, with its jury trials, its ability, or its requirement that you face your accuser, with its protections of U.S. citizens, makes sense. Other countries may have had different thoughts on that, and that's why they ratified them. But when it comes to U.S. treaties and the federal law implications, the U.S. takes these treaties very seriously. So it's why they have not ratified them. So there you go with that.